All right, so today I'm talking about regulation of architecture. So not only the regulation of the profession, but also the built environment. And while it may seem like a very dry topic or very dry subject, but I'll try to go through the legislative part quickly. Then after that, offer an example of a very simple project to see how regulation is applied on the project. So in Singapore, there are 8 professions governed by Acts of Parliament. The top ones, I think, well, most of you would have come in contact with doctor, pharmacist, dentist, hopefully not so much with a lawyer. And if you run a business, you probably have an accountant. But the 3 at the bottom are from the built environment, and likely if you haven't been involved in a construction project, then probably you haven't had much contact with the 3 professions that are down here. So today we're talking about architects. And architects are basically governed by the Architects Act. And this act is administered by a body called the Board of Architects. So if we do anything wrong, it's the Board of Architects that comes after us. So how do we become an architect? Well, first of all, we have to have a degree from a recognized institution. So be a university, and the minimum is a 5-year course. And after that, you need at least 24 months experience. And this experience must be supervised. It cannot be just working for anyone, but you have to actually be working for a supervisor who is an architect, and also an advisor who is not your employer, but someone independent who is also an architect. And after that, you need to pass a professional exam, which within the exam itself, there are quite a number of hoops to jump over. You have to be submitting log sheets, case studies, sit for a written exam, and then if you pass all of that, then finally you have to go for an oral exam, and then if you pass that, then you can be called a registered architect. And once you're registered, you can use the title AR. So some of us, if you get our business cards or see our names, you'll see the title AR in front of it, which means we are registered. But that's not the end of the story, because after we get our registration, we still cannot practice. We have to have a practicing certificate. And this practicing certificate is renewable every year. And we have to satisfy continuing professional development points. So we have to attend courses, we have to keep up with the times, you know, we have to be up to date with codes, technical requirements, contracts, ethics, whole myriad of things. So we have to make sure that we are continually developing and improving ourselves. And if you want to find out who's a registered architect, it's pretty easy. You just go to the Board of Architects website over here, boa.gov.sg, and then you can click on Find Architects, go to Register of Architects, and then you can search. Like if you search for me, then you'll find me there. So if you meet anyone who's offering you architectural service, you can just come here, type their name here, and then see if it pops up. If it doesn't, that means they are not registered. All right, so why do we have to jump through so many hoops, go through so many courses, CPD, practicing cert, all that? This is to make sure that we have the core competencies. This is for public protection, and it's also to ensure that there are minimum standards for professional service. So what are these core competencies? Well, basically this diagram sort of describes it all. So you know that architects do the design, and I think you may have heard of this, this term called qualified person as well. Qualified person in the statutory acts means people who are qualified to submit building plans to authorities. So when we do the design, we have to actually make sure that our designs are actually compliant. Then after that, we have to submit to the authorities to make sure they're compliant. And then we have to follow through as well with supervision to make sure what is constructed is compliant. Then on this side, maybe you may not be so familiar, but after we've done the design, it's not sufficient information for a builder to price or to construct. So we also need to do documentation. We have to do the construction drawings. We have to do tender drawings, specifications, a whole heap of information so that first of all, the builder can price it. Then after that, the builder has enough information from which to build. And then during construction, we are also involved in contract administration. So the architect also must be conversant in legal issues. We must know contract law, and we must be able to administer the contract in an impartial manner. So this portion on contract administration, my fellow panelists, Tzu Ing, will be covering later. So I will focus more on these 3 quadrants. So why do we have so much regulation? Actually, in Singapore, every square millimeter of everywhere is regulated by somebody, right? And why do we have so much regulation? It's to make sure that we have an environment that is healthy, safe, and also in terms of amenities, so that you don't have like factories sited next to residential areas. And then of course there's national security as well, how we deal with fire and also how we deal with terrorist threats or international threats. So all of these are part of the system to make sure that everything works, and that's why when you go out and about in the built environment, everything is safe and everything works. You turn on the tap in your home and water comes out of it and you can drink the water, right? So where architects come in is that as qualified persons, as I mentioned just now, we have to make sure we comply with all the regulations, and then we have to submit the plans and then ensure that the built works are also compliant. So in Singapore, there are many government agencies that are regulating the built environment, and fundamentally it's in actually three areas that they regulate. So in terms of health and safety, you have this group of authorities, and then for infrastructure, you have this group. You can see there's an overlap between the two. And then the third group are the ones that basically regulate the amenity, like making the place nice, not just making it safe, but also making it psychologically pleasing, and also supportive of our social structures as well. So some of these you may have heard of, like BCA. You would have heard of National Environment Agency, PUB that looks after our water supply and sewage system. LTA, of course, looks after our transport infrastructure, power grid, electricity supply. IMDA for the internet, URA and parks. And parks protects all our trees and greenery. Then, of course, there's FSSD that looks after fire safety. Right? Then there are others that actually look after socio-economic policies as well as national security. And then Singapore Land Authority looks after state land. So actually you see so many of these government agencies, regardless of the size of the project. We generally have to submit to about 6 or 7 agencies. And not only do we submit once, we actually go for 3 or 4 rounds of submissions. First is at the conceptual stage, we have to submit for development control. Then when we have developed the design, we have to submit for building plan. So it's the second round. Then when the construction is finished, we go a 3rd round to get the temporary occupation permit or TOP. And then there can be a 4th round to get the certificate of statutory completions. So a lot of submissions. So now I'm just going to illustrate what happens on a real project. But I will use a very small project that we've just completed in January this year, so that you can see how what an architect does and how regulation actually affects the built environment. So this is a little project that we did, completed recently, where the builder actually approached us about middle of last year. They had a design for a tree house that looked like this. They didn't have an architect at that time, and they thought they were actually doing this as part of their CSR program, as a donation to a kindergarten. And they thought, oh, well, you know, this is just like something like playground equipment. It's just like this little structure here. You know, why do we need to bother to engage an architect? So they had a structural engineer work out all the structural sizes, and then the builder did their own drawings. And then they got stuck for about a year trying to navigate all the regulations. Then finally, they came to us. And initially, the brief to us was, oh, just make this comply and then do the submissions. So that was the brief, right? Oh, find an architect to do a submission, sign and submit, and you know, then everything will be fine. But life is not that simple. So basically what we looked at were all of these compliances. So we had to look at BCA. So the structure, of course, was already designed and complied with SS and EN standards. SS is Singapore standard, EN is European. Then we have to look at headroom. How high is this? Safety from falling, all these barriers. Stair dimensions, do they comply? And then lightning protection as well. So this structure has to have lightning protection. Then we had to look at the fire code. National Parks Board tree conservation because there were trees around. And also because this is playground equipment, so we needed to comply with SS 457. And then because there's danger of children falling, we had to look at impact attenuation, which is under SS 495. And then because it was on HDB land managed by town council, so we also had to look at the public liability issues. So when we look at all of this, we cannot just submit. And in the process of making it comply, we actually redesigned it. So what happened was the design became like this. So in terms of structure, as I said, the engineer already looked after the structural integrity part. It already complied with SS and EN standards. But to us, we don't just look at whether the structure can stand up, but does it make you feel good? Or does the structure look logical? Does it feel like it's standing up? So we felt actually that this looked like it was sort of sitting on a table, and with the steel structure underneath, it looked like somehow the structure didn't look logical, even though it was compliant. So we, and then the other thing was when we went to consult FSSD 3 times for this small little structure, and FSSD, it couldn't really fit into any particular building type. So when we tried to use institution or something like that, which was to do with schools, it meant that we would have to apply for 15 waivers. And even for a large project, we never have to apply for 15 waivers, but because this didn't fit into any particular category, so it meant, you know, sort of trying to contort the thing to comply with regulations. So we had multiple discussions with FSSD, and their main concern really was smoke dispersion. So what we did was we removed this roof, the tiled roof, and we turned it into a pergola structure. So that at the same time we moved the steel structure out, and we made the structure more visually rational, so that it's like an arbor, it's like a traditional arbor in a garden, and then you have a structure that's cantilevered out, supported in the middle of it. So that was how we sort of rationalized how it should look visually, as well as comply with FSSD. And because we used a mesh up here to create this sense of enclosure, but still allow smoke to disperse. So because of that, we were then allowed to not have to submit to FSSD, because that was their main concern. Then we also needed to check the means of escape, make sure that the stairs were the correct width for people to escape. And then this part is, I guess, the funniest part of this project, because of tree conservation. There were actually 2 trees very close to this structure. And although this is called a tree house, but NParks has this requirement called a tree protection zone, and we couldn't go near the trees. So when you do a tree house in Singapore, we actually ended up with a house between 2 trees rather than a tree house, so as to avoid damaging the roots of trees. But then that also got us thinking, because the original objective is for the children to be able to play in the tree and be surrounded by foliage. So then we decided to turn this whole structure into a tree as well. And we introduced these climbing cables so that you could put in planting, and eventually when the plants take over the structure, then when the children play up here, they will be surrounded by foliage and be, you know, as if they're in a tree. So we decided as part of the concept to turn it into a tree as well. Then of course the other technical parts, playground equipment, in terms of the detailing, we have to make sure that there are no gaps for little fingers to get trapped, we have to consider the size of a 2-year-old's torso, that they won't get stuck anywhere or stick their heads into any gaps and get stuck. And then there can't be any sharp edges, so everything had to be chamfered, etc. Then for impact attenuation, we couldn't rely on just the ground or grass alone, because if it doesn't rain for some time, the ground can actually be rock hard. So we had to use an EPDM base, which had to be tested to make sure that it could absorb the impact of someone falling on it. And then because of public liability, we had to add a gate here so that the kindergarten can lock this up, and they were responsible to maintain the whole structure. And when the children can only play there supervised, and when they're not using it, they have to lock it up so that people can't, the general public cannot go up the structure itself. So you can see that for a very small project like this, compliance is still quite a significant part of it, and not something that you can sort of brush aside and say, oh, just get somebody to sign and submit. Then, of course, in addition to that, as I mentioned, we do documentation. So we actually produce the construction drawings. The builder had produced a set of drawings for the previous proposal, but they couldn't be used anymore because we changed the design. So we produced an entire set of construction drawings for the builder, and also did all the detailing. We just now Hui Xiang was mentioning that we use technology to make our outputs more efficient. So we modeled this in using building information modeling, or BIM. You may have heard this, BIM for short. So we use BIM actually to generate the perspective that you saw earlier, to generate the construction drawings and the details. And we also use our BIM model to generate the quantities. So we worked with the builder to figure out the sizes that were available in the market. Then we scheduled everything. So it made life a lot easier for the builder as well, because he could then go and buy the materials that he needed. So basically, an architect looks at everything holistically. We can't just look at compliance in isolation. So this is the finished structure. So as you can see, design and compliance and documentation and everything needs to be looked at holistically, so that we can come up with a result where, to the layman, actually, you can just go and enjoy the structure, totally oblivious of what's gone on behind the scenes. And in fact, the compliance portion becomes invisible. When you go there, you're not aware of all the codes that we have to comply with, or you're not aware of why we made certain design decisions. You can just appreciate the structure for itself. And we went actually, after the circuit breaker, we managed to get CSC in January, just before the circuit breaker. And then, we obviously could not visit the site after that. But after the circuit breaker was over, we went again and we found that the plants had already reached the top. So you can already see flowers and things out here. So we were actually quite happy to see that the actual structure now looked just like our perspectives, or actually even better. So the title of this talk is Why Architect? Why do you want to engage an architect? So after you consider all regulation and everything, at the end of the day, actually, what is this all about? Actually, what we want to do is to bring joy. That's why you want to engage an architect, because you want to have a good result. So what we did was that we actually spent an afternoon with the children. If some of you who have been following Archifest for the last couple of weeks, if you attended the Archifest conference 2 weeks ago, there were some architects who were talking about community participation, or getting the community to come and help with the construction. But that was happening in rural areas. So how do you apply this in an urban area? Well, in an urban area, it's not so simple. Because of all the regulation, there are a lot of safety considerations. And also, a construction site is still a construction site. No matter how big or small a structure is, we have to put boarding around it. And the public is not allowed to enter the site, because the site is not a playground. The site is a dangerous place. So the parents, the community, and the children were not allowed to go into the site during construction. But we did the next best thing. We spent the afternoon with the children while the while the structure was under construction, and we showed them the design drawings, we showed them the construction drawings, we showed them photographs of what was going on site, so that they could appreciate the process. And then after that, we spent a couple of hours making models with them. So you can see the kids, they broke up into different groups, and we gave them sort of pre-cut out cardboard pieces that they could fold, color, and glue together. And then they could all decorate their own tree house in their own way, and have a lot of fun with it, and really feel a connection with the tree house. So we can, in an urban setting, even with liability issues and safety issues, we can still engage with the community in a different way and give them a way to participate in the process, so that they still feel included and still feel a connection as part of the creative process. So the children, actually, they are now writing a book. They're writing poems and stories about the treehouse. And when it's ready, we've actually requested for a copy. So we are looking forward to receiving a copy of their book when they're done. So just to wrap up, regulation and compliance is actually not about just getting an architect to sign or submit. If you do that, you're really not getting the most out of your architect. So you will actually get much more if you engage the architect for a full scope of service, because the architect can then give you a holistic solution that is much better than what you imagined. So with that, thank you very much, and I will pass back to Hui Xiang.